Okay, we're rolling. Okay, you win.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Yours was more extended.
Yes,
Yours
it's
was
true.
the extended dance mix version.
Right. And 3, 2, 1. From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Can you dig it?
If you've got a tip for Melissa, a pretty picture with a not-so-pretty backstory, something you think you know but don't know if you know you know, how to make sense of that last sentence, anything, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. Just might hear your tip on the podcast. And now here's your host, still upset that her stocking stuffer search on Amazon could not come up with a Santa corn doll, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell! Was the bell part too loud? Did I scream too much?
No, it's all right.
Okay, good. If there's a Santa corn, it's probably on an adult website, and I don't want to know. So let's just back that right
It's got
out.
a cute little horn, I think.
Is that what you kids call it?
Oh, taxi.
Right. Yeah. I
Okay.
do not want a Santa corn. I am, however, slightly in love with the sloth-a-corn
Yeah.
that is made by Gund.
That I didn't even know that they made.
No, apparently they just stick a horn on any old thing now and call it a something-a-corn.
Well,
but it's Tipster Allison's fault. She is apparently a fan of the Gund. Which you had not heard of, but I was like, Gund has been around. I'm guessing it's German or something. They've been
Sounds
around since I was
That would
since
make
I was
sense,
a
though,
kid.
kind of, wouldn't it?
A sloth-a-corn being German?
Yeah.
No?
No? That,
No.
okay.
But Tipster Allison posted it on Facebook, and I'm like, God damn it! Now I must have this. It's the cutest thing. It's a blue, like a light blue sloth, wearing like a little unicorn suit. I just am madly in love with it.
Well, okay.
Because I'm a grown ass woman.
Yeah. I saw some other acorns that Gund made, too. Gund made a bunch of different
Gund
acorns.
makes a bunch of acorns. Yeah, and
Right.
they are quite adorable, if I don't say so myself. Which, speaking of that, the exquisite Suzanne sent me a box of unicorn items that I guess she's been collecting since she was a toddler. Because there were, let's see, the erasers are the ones I'm a little bit obsessed with. They came in a little mason jar, a little plastic mason jar, and multicolored unicorn erasers I'm going to put on every pencil I own. There's like 10 or 12 or something.
You know, the house is getting a little crowded. It's kind of getting spooky. It's kind of getting a little disturbing because it's like one of those things where you wake up and you're not sure which way you turn. Dun, 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 dun. Ah!
And there's a unicorn.
There's another
on ya?
unicorn
Yeah.
something.
I try to keep it limited to my spaces that you aren't in every day. I have to say the podcast room's getting a little nursery school looking.
But it's, come on.
Yeah.
The podcast room, it looks cool. It looks.
Oh, no.
It's very cool.
It does
looking.
not.
No,
Cool. No, it does not. I have much housekeeping to do, which I'm going to say is physical housekeeping because the podcast room, as an example, I am looking at my notes that are propped up on a ironing board. So, right, which is in place for the horrible item called a Cricut that I purchased that is dominating my life, and I'm absolutely awful at cutting vinyl. So let's just get that out of the way. But the other part of the housekeeping, producer Mark.
Housekeeping. Housekeeping.
That part of the housekeeping is involving the podcast. And we have so much housekeeping to discuss. I'll try and keep it down to adult roar. Our wonderful newest patron on Patreon is Tipster Laura from Colorado. She's quite exquisite. I want to thank Tipster Christine for her review. I want to thank Tipster Stephanie for her emails and her understanding of my inability to eat at either Red Lobster or Olive Garden. She mentioned
that was hilarious.
Yes, she mentioned that her partner in crime, as she calls her partner, is a chef and refuses to set foot in either a Red Lobster or an Olive Garden, which owned by the same company, by the way. So I applaud that. I applaud Tipster Stephanie and her decision, and her partner in crime's decision. I would like to thank Tipster Jessica for making me laugh until I hurt myself, because she said she and her sister have now adopted more cowbell as their safe word.
There's their safe word?
Well, not safe word because they're...
Okay, what's going on?
I know, I'm sorry.
Hold on.
I told her it's called a safe word here. They call it a code word. So it's their code word for when they want to like get away from their family at Thanksgiving.
Ah, okay. That's a safe word.
I know, I'm sorry.
Kind.
I said safe word because I think that's funnier than code word. But I told her our new safe word was going to be Jessica.
Oh.
So it used to be pineapple.
I think I can get into that.
But
I think.
But our new safe word is now going to be Jessica. So Jessica and her sister are new listeners, and we are grateful to have them, no matter what their code word or safe word is. Although I think more cowbell is pretty hilarious as far as like if you just say to someone like, hey, more cowbell, and then you both just get up and get your coats and get the fuck out. I think that's priceless,
and
actually.
It'll baffle the relatives.
And they'll be like, did they hear, is there a cow? I don't know what's happening. Are they hungry? So also Tipster Courtney with a K wrote a lovely review. And the most recent review is Tipster Mimi and Pa, like PA. So I don't know if it's Mimi and her dad, or if Mimi has like another like personality, or if,
maybe she just calls her husband Pa.
Oh yeah, maybe it's Mimi and Pa, like me and my pa, or my daddy, or oh no, now I'm starting.
See, now you're doing it again.
I know, I got the safe word.
Yeah.
Jessica. I just have to say Jessica really loudly when I want everything to stop. And hopefully we are not in a room with a girl named Jessica, because then she'll come running over and it'll be bad.
Oh dear.
So part of the housekeeping is that the exquisite Elsie Brown, who is a journalist on medium.com and a blogger and a podcast host of her own, wrote a list for 2019 of the 50 podcasts you need to listen to that you may not know about. And we were number 26. And Elsie is just like a gem of a human. She, her podcast is called Spiritual Nuggets. It's very short. I've mentioned it before. It's maybe 4 to 6 minutes long. She has a Facebook group and page, and she's like Mother Teresa if she cursed. She's adorable. I love her with all my heart.
Wow,
she's very loving and spiritual.
Metaphor.
She's amazing. She's very loving and spiritual, and not afraid to say fuck. So how do you not love that all in one little tiny body? That's like the perfect package. So if I feel like everyone needs a little more peace or peace of mind in their life, and if you do need that, Elsie's podcast is great. And I'm not saying this because she said nice things about us, which she did, but I'll
say nice things about her because she said nice things about us. Thank you.
She's a national.
Thank you.
She's a national treasure. She is a great writer, just real and authentic, and just no bullshit. She's a really terrific kid. I'm really blessed to know her, and I'm really blessed that she likes our podcast, because she has, I don't know, brought people out of the woodwork. We've had, more downloads in the first, week of December than we've had in quite a while. And from all over, Australia is still just kicking ass and taking names, just second only to the US. Canada and the UK are sort of battling it out within, a small number of people between them for third place. And ironically, fourth place, Germany, which is kind of funny because I continually say that, that Adam Carolla call-in game he used to play called Florida or Germany, where he would mention something just atrocious that happened that one human would do to another, and then you would have to call in and tell him if it happened in Florida or Germany. So I'm not sure why Germany is on the map all of a sudden, but I guess we're heard in about, 47 countries. And
at last count.
Yeah, I'm overwhelmed. I really am overwhelmed at the places that are listening. I'm like, I can't believe, you people give a shit, but thank you for giving a shit. And thank you again to our Australian listeners who are just phenomenal. And December is this unsolved serial sort of thing that I didn't want to do. And I will partially blame Tipster Emily for causing the whole kerfluffle on Thanksgiving. But before I get to that, I do want to say, still part of housekeeping, beautiful, wonderful, brilliant girls who host a podcast called Fresh Hell. They are pretty phenomenal in that Annie is in Boston and Johanna is in Vienna, and they somehow make it work. I don't know if they just have the best Wi-Fi on earth or great phones, but it's seamless and it sounds like they're in the same room. They are brilliant, wonderful, funny girls, and here is their promo.
Hi, we're the hosts of the Fresh Hell podcast. I'm Annie in Boston, Massachusetts.
And I'm Johanna in Vienna, Austria. Join us every Wednesday for a new terrible story.
I focus mostly on cases in the United States, and not just true crime like the terrifying axe murders on Smutty Nose Island, but also shocking stories like the New Jersey shark attacks of 1916.
And I love to tell you about more obscure European cases. And let me tell you, Germany has produced more cannibals than one would think.
So if you're a fan of true crime, but you also enjoy terrible stories of all sorts, give us a listen. We'll tell you everything you need to know and then some.
Come find Fresh Hell Podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Auf Wiedersehen.
Hope to see you soon.
I love those girls. They're insane and brilliant, and their chemistry is amazing to listen to, because even though they're on, different parts of the world and it's different times, they somehow still make it work. They're like this fantastic married couple that you don't know how they do it, and yet they do it, except they're not married to each other. I don't think they are. No, they're not. And they're terrific, and I think you will love their podcast too. So back to the unsolved serial killer bullshittery that is Emily's fault. Tipster Emily was here on Thanksgiving, and I had just turned on the ID network, as I often do. And I know I've mentioned that People Magazine Investigates is either phenomenal or a pile of shit. And this one was pretty phenomenal. And I really became even more interested. It's what inspired me to find last week's case, also an, sort of unsolved serial. But this one is so goddamn heartbreaking. And I felt so ignorant that I had never heard about it. And they did People Magazine Investigates did a phenomenal job of covering it. Obviously, in a 1-hour television show, you can't get everything, but I'm a much more auditory person. I can hear things much better than I can see things. But sometimes a case needs to be seen. I'm not saying this one needed to be seen. You can absolutely hear about it and hear all of the details in all of its, horrifying, realness. But it was interesting seeing the sergeant, the homicide detective who was in charge of the homicide department in DC, who's still alive and is kind of a shero. She's an amazing woman, Romaine Jenkins. She retired in 1994, and she had become a sergeant over an 8-person homicide squad, all men, in 1987. And when she got to a place of, more responsibility and some power, the first thing she wanted to do was to solve this unsolved, horrible case. So let's start back at the beginning. Carol Spinks was a 13-year-old girl, and she had a twin in 1971. And she's at home with her twin. She's Carol Denise Spinks, and her twin is Carolyn Denise Spinks. And their mom, there's a lot of Denises here in the middle names, and there's 2 Brendas. So I'm just asking you to hang with me, and I'm going to try to make this as linear as possible and hopefully easy to understand. So Carol Spinks was at home with her twin sister, Carolyn. And at the time, in 1971, you don't answer the door. In D.C. or in Independence, Kentucky, or wherever you lived, you don't answer the door unless you know who's there. And their mother, Allentine, had left the 2 girls, the 2 13-year-old twins, at home and said, don't answer the door if it's Jesus Christ. Unless I tell you to, you do not answer the door even if he says it's Jesus Christ. He'll have to come in through the chimney or the window like Santa. So they were at home, and their mom went to visit a friend not far away. And their sister, their older sister, had moved out of the house already, Valerie. She was visiting a friend who lived across the hall. And she bangs on the door, and they won't answer. Finally, she yells through the door, "It's your sister. It's Valerie. Answer the door." They finally answer the door, and she says, look, would one of you just go to the store for me? Here's some money. Would you go get me a couple things at the store? Just a couple blocks away. And Carolyn is like, nope. Mom said no. And Carol finally relents and says, all right, I'll go. And Carol Spinks is walking down the street to the store. And what happens when your mom tells you not to answer the door? She runs into her mom. And her mom's like,
oh, that's not good.
Her mom's like, all right, little missy, go to the store for your sister, and you're going to get a talking to when I get home. But she never made it home. And it took 6 days later before her body was found on the northbound lanes of the I-295 behind St. Elizabeth Hospital. Now, this is a difficult time. It's May of 1971. And there are Vietnam protests, one of the biggest protests ever in D.C. There's a lot going on in D.C. that can, occupy the headlines and keep people from paying attention to a lot of young girls who go missing and then quickly found not the way you want to find them. The weird thing about Carol's case, a lot of weird things, but the weird thing to me is that she was not killed immediately. There was undigested food found in her body, so the person who had taken her had kept her for several days and fed her. Now, here's one of the things that happens on People Magazine Investigates. They leave you to figure things out on your own. But when you do research, you find, oh, okay, I guess that's what they meant. So what they show is a young girl being held somewhere in a home, maybe a basement of a home, which is more popular on the East Coast. And they show a brown paper bag being kind of thrown on the floor and an orange rolling out on the floor toward the young girl. And you think, okay, is that their way of saying he fed her? But you don't really know until you do some more research and you find out that there was undigested citrus in her stomach. So he had fed her at least an orange. And he had not killed her immediately. He had kept her, unfortunately, probably tortured her, and then left her right off the 295.
Which is it's part of the Beltway.
Oh, thank you. I was
DC.
going to mention that producer Mark has a much better outlook on the geography of this, because I'm like, DC, Maryland, Virginia, it's all running together. My brain hurts. So if there's a question or a point that you need to bring up, producer Mark, please feel free, because I do not know the area. I don't know. I'm guessing it's all very close together.
Yes, the Maryland, Virginia, DC, they're all right. It's all right in that same area.
In it, the police actually had thought that perhaps unknowingly this unidentified serial killer had put bodies in different parts, hoping that certain districts didn't talk to each other, which, as we know, my biggest pet peeve is the the linkage blindness, which we mentioned last week. But it turns out I've never heard of a case like this where only a few of the victims were found, and they were all still found pretty quick. But in most cases, these victims were found within hours of going missing. Hours. I've never heard of anything like this. And I don't think that it was because everyone was on the, with their eyes open on the outlook for something like this. I don't know if it was bad luck for him, but he did get some luck later on because of the way things turned out. But so our second victim, Darlenia Denise Johnson, on July 19th of 1971, she was 16 years old. And she was found only 15 feet from where 13-year-old Carol Spinks had been found. Now,
Same thing behind that hospital?
15 feet off of the I-295 behind St. Elizabeth. So she had gone to the store for her mom, and unfortunately, she was really too decomposed after they found her. It was 11 days later, and it was July. It was humid. She goes missing, the 8th of July. She's found the 19th of July. And she, they can't really tell if she'd been sexually assaulted. They were really even having trouble struggling to give her a proper manner of death. The only real thing the police found of evidentiary value was that she had been manually strangulated. Not with a ligature, but manual strangulation. There were a lot of these victims had those half-moon shaped cuts in their neck, which is indicative of fingernails. So someone strangling you with their fingernail, a nail is shaped. If you do a nail impression, it's shaped sort of like a half moon. So several of the victims had that half moon cuts in their necks for manual strangulation. I know I'm making this sound just so pleasant.
It sounds awful.
It sounds absolutely awful. And especially because Mrs. Johnson, the entire time her daughter was missing, had received phone calls reminiscent of the Golden State Killer, where there was heavy breathing. Just every day, phone calls with heavy breathing. And she's found 11 days later, and 3 days after that, she receives a phone call with a male voice that said, "I killed your daughter."
That's all it said?
"I killed your daughter."
And then hung up.
There, was a witness that said they saw her get into an old black car driven by an African-American male. Now, I don't know if any of these tips are true or, panned out in any way, because there are numerous cars mentioned, which you'll hear as we go along. But one thing that was really awful is that there was an anonymous caller to the police who said, "Hey, there's a dead body, off the 295, and the police drove by and didn't see her, and kept going."
Oh my God!
So that was about 6 days after she went missing, and it took 5 more days after that when they actually found her, and she was 15 feet from where, 3 months earlier, Carol Spinks had been found. It just, I'm not saying, well, I'm going to have to say, this case, even the police officers that were interviewed that have since retired said this is an embarrassment to the DC Police Department. And they're right. It was botched every way from Sunday, quite frankly. I'm surprised that there's any information left when you find out what actually happened. So Brenda Faye Crockett was 10 years old, and on July 27th of 1971, she was sent to the store by her mother, and 2 hours later, the phone rings, and by this time her mom is out looking for her because she's like, "I don't know why she hasn't come home. I just sent her a few blocks away to get some things at the store." Her 7-year-old sister, Bertha, answers. Now, Bertha's still alive, and she's one of the people interviewed in the People Magazine Investigates episode, and she is a lovely human being who makes some really great points about this case. But she's 7 at the time, and she answers the phone, and she can hear her sister Brenda softly crying. And she says, "A white man picked me up, and he'll put me home. He'll put me in a cab and send me home." Now, Bertha is 7 and says, "Well, where are you? Mom's looking for you." And she says, "I'm in Virginia." And then she hangs up. A few minutes later, now her mom is still out looking for her. This man has been described as either her stepdad or a family friend, so I don't know exactly what to call him. But a few minutes later, the phone rings again. And instead of letting 7-year-old Bertha pick up the phone, this man answers the phone and says, "Where are you? What's going on?" And she repeats the same thing, like she had been prodded to say, "A white man picked me up in his car. I'm in Virginia. He's going to put me in a cab and send me home." And he said, "Why don't you let us come and get you? Tell me where you are. I'll come and get you." And the last thing she says is, and it sounds again like she had been prodded to say this, "Did my mom see me?"
What?
Meaning, obviously the killer had kept her somewhere close to her home, and they could see her mother looking for her.
Oh my God.
And her stepdad or the family friend says, "If your mother had seen you, she would have picked you up. Tell me where you are." And at that time, the gentleman on the phone can hear heavy male footsteps. And then she says, "I'll see you," and hung up. So the police think that obviously whoever had Brenda was feeding her incorrect information that she's supposed to tell her family. And it's literally a short few hours later, at 5:50 a.m. the next day, not even 12 hours later, a hitchhiker discovers her shoeless body conspicuously placed on U.S. Route 50 near the Baltimore-Washington Parkway in Prince George's County, Maryland. She's been raped and strangled, and this time there's a scarf tied around her neck.
She was 10 years old?
10 years old. 10 years old. So his victims, as you'll see, range in age, but really not that much. The oldest victim is 18. And it's just, yeah. So victim 4, Nina Moshe Yates. Now everyone calls her Nino. N-E-N-O as a nickname. So 12-year-old Nina Moshe Yates is walking home from the store around 7 p.m. on October 1st of 1971. She's raped and strangled, and within 3 hours of her abduction, she is found on the shoulder of the Pennsylvania Avenue exit in Prince George's County in Maryland. There are unidentified green fibers found on her clothing. Now here's another car reference. There's a witness who saw a little girl getting into a blue Volkswagen with an African-American man, although that lead never went anywhere. And it's finally after this 4th murder that the Daily News in Washington describes this as the Freeway Phantom. They give him the name, the Freeway Phantom, describing the murders.
Jeez, that's what an awful name. Stupid name.
It is an awful name, except that he is so fast and gets away. It's, at first they called him the Freeway Strangler, but then they changed it to the Freeway Phantom, and he's a motherfucking phantom at this point.
Yeah, I guess I see.
I mean,
it just makes him sound like a cartoon superhero.
I understand what
or
you're
something.
saying. I understand what you're saying, but the name unfortunately fits. There are African American hairs found in her underwear, and they have not released that there are African American hair is found in every other victim's underwear, as well as the green fibers found on their clothing. Now, the fact that the fibers are found on the clothing, on the outside of the clothing, they're guessing that the green fibers came from carpeting in a car, and that the victims were either held down or made to lay down in the floor of a car, picking up the fibers on their clothing. So victim 5, Brenda Denise Woodard. She is 18 years old, and she's from Baltimore, and she had taken a class, an evening class, in Maryland, and she had dinner with a friend after the class, and then got on a bus, headed home to Baltimore about 11:30 p.m. And 6 hours later, November 15th of 1971, 18-year-old Brenda Woodard is found by a police officer. Now, here's the difference. She has been strangled, and she has been stabbed multiple times. She still has her shoes on, unlike the other victims, and she has been raped and strangled, but she's also been stabbed multiple times. And there's a velvet coat that's placed over her body. And this time he is communicating with the police, and he leaves a note in the pocket of the velvet coat, and it says, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me, if you can, the Freeway Phantom."
Okay. So he's getting cocky.
Mm-hmm.
What was this also found? Did the police officer find her along a highway again?
Mm-hmm. She was found near Prince George's County Hospital in a grassy area off of the freeway. Now, the weird thing about the note, they finally determined that it was Brenda's handwriting, and that the flow of her writing showed no distress. There was no hesitation marks in her writing. She had obviously been directed by someone. They had dictated to her what to write, but whoever it was, she didn't feel like she was under duress, and that the paper actually came from her own school notebook.
Well, that's fascinating.
Now you know why the Phantom part. I mean, it's a terrible name. I feel ignorant that I had never heard of it until this episode of People Magazine Investigates. There's also a new book out by Blaine Pardo and I believe his daughter Victoria Hester. I'm not familiar with a father and daughter team who write books together, but they've written a book called Tantamount, which is the word that, kind of stands out in the note that he wrote.
Right. It's misused. It doesn't really, it sounds like it's written by somebody who likes to think he's very
smart.
Right.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. So they have a book out called Tantamount. I have not read it. It's very, very new, but it came out sort of close to the time that this episode of People Magazine Investigates came out, which is, it's a really well done episode, but it does leave you to kind of want to figure out more of the details. So by this time, after, 5 young girls have gone missing and pretty quickly found, pretty much every man in the D.C. area was under suspicion, probably even Richard Nixon. But I mean, they were looking at doctors, at priests, and at police officers because they felt that these young girls maybe even knew their captor because they, the phone call, from Brenda was pretty calm, even though she had been crying a little bit. The note was written by, the other Brenda, the 5th victim, in her own handwriting that did not look distressed. It's they're now looking at pretty much every man in the DC area. Now, just to confuse things a little more, Angela Denise Barnes, also middle name Denise, she was 15. She was raped and murdered. And at first, immediately they thought, oh my God, it's another victim of the Freeway Phantom. But it turns out 2 ex-cops killed her, Edward Sullivan and Tommy Simmons. So now, there's a beautiful young African-American girl, 14, raped and murdered by 2 ex-cops.
Wow,
And,
all of this, the same
at
period
the same
of time.
time. Yeah, but it took a while to rule her out as one of the Freeway Phantom's victims, but they did eventually find her killers and they were prosecuted. 2 ex-cops, delightful. So the final victim that we know of the Freeway Phantom is Diane Denise Williams, and that's on September 5th of 1972. She's really quite beautiful. She had made dinner for her family, and then she went to visit her boyfriend, as she had done many times, and he walked her to the bus stop, kissed her goodbye, and put her on the bus. And, she was seen on the bus. And literally a few hours later, she's found along the I-295 freeway south of the district line. So she's south of the, DC line. So this killer, I don't know if he was smart enough to know he may have, bought himself some time by going into different areas, but he really didn't, because his victims were found so quickly. I've never in my life heard of all of these victims of one killer being found, unless they had been left in their homes, which they weren't. These were women who were tossed out on the freeway. It just is amazing to me how quickly they were found. And like some of the other victims, her shoes were missing. And they thought that she had not been sexually assaulted. They thought that he may be taking shoes as trophies. Some of them were found with their shoes. Some of them were not. They thought she had not been sexually assaulted, but they did find semen on the outside of her clothing. And they assumed it was her boyfriend's. But he, confirmed to them that they had not had any sexual contact over or under their clothing. So the Maryland State Police had collected the semen. They, sent it to the FBI. The FBI returned it to them, and then they didn't test it.
So nobody tested it. It went back and forth
back
like that,
and forth.
Nobody tested it.
Exactly. It takes a while, again, for this linkage blindness to be wiped from their eyes, and that they notice that 5 of the 6 victims have that green synthetic carpet fiber on their clothing, and they don't release that to the public for a very long time, hoping that can be held back so that only the killer would know that. But they're releasing it now because they really want some help all these years later. So they even find someone from the FBI who can work with the Maryland State Police and the Prince George's County Police to try and figure out a geographic, what they call an anchor point. I'm not a huge fan of the geoforensics. I mean, I get that you can probably pinpoint, especially a serial killer, where they live or where they work or where they're comfortable. But, so they think this person was between 27 and 32. They think he had a day job, I think, because most of the victims went missing in the evening hours or at night. They think he was comfortable in this, specific 3-mile area, even though the bodies were, placed in different parts. They were not that far apart. I kind of understand that. But then something happens, like Diane Williams being his last victim on September 5th. And then what happens? Is he arrested? Is he killed? Does he move?
So there's been nothing since September of 72, is
Yep.
that what? Nothing.
Nope. Nothing. Let me couch that by saying nothing they can connect to him, because I'll explain what horrible things happened that may have kept this case from being solved. So there were lots of tips, obviously, that came in. There was even a jailhouse informant named Morris Warren, who was part of something called, hold on to your hats, the Green Vega Gang.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, to me, I would not be, afraid of anyone who drove a Green Vega. I'm sorry. That's terrible. But it's the early 70s, and it would be like saying I'm a member of the Brown Pacer gang.
I don't know. That's kind of scary.
So the Green Vega gang was a group of assholes who drove Green Vegas and went around raping women. Now, they had not been charged with any murders, but a group of assholes who drove Green Vegas, raped women and young girls, mostly women. And they, thought, hey, those green fibers from that car, from, the flooring, I bet you. So Morris Warren gets himself a couple of field trips, which, as we have heard many times in the past, this is what assholes do when they want a day out. So he's like, hey, I can name you the people who did this. I didn't do it. I was in the gang, but I got names for you. I can tell you where they're at. So they take him out on one field trip, and he actually takes him to the dump site where the first two victims were found, within 15 feet of each other. Now, I'm going to say perhaps Morris Warren read a newspaper.
Do you think?
Yes.
Possible?
Yes.
Maybe?
So the second trip doesn't go as well. His details are getting a little fuzzy. He can't really remember where any of the other bodies were supposed to be. And while they're out on the radio, there is a report that someone from the Lorton prison, which is where he was housed, was cooperating with the police, and that information was coming out, and that this person cooperating had been a part of the Green Vega rape gang. And he freaks out and says, I'm not telling you anything else. Take me back to the jail. And they did. And he told them nothing else. And then they find out a few years later, going through his communications, that he had actually sent letters to some other gang members saying, I made the whole thing up so I can get a field day. And they also found out that the Green Vega had not been produced until after 5 of the 6 women had been murdered, young girls.
You think the cops would have figured that out before they... Okay, never mind.
Let me tell you, it gets worse from here. So I mentioned Romaine Jenkins, who is really a shero, and she still will not give up. And she shows up to an interview on People Magazine Investigates with a giant file folder. So this woman has been retired since 1994, and she's still such a fucking badass that she shows up to an interview with her big file folder. I love her so much. She is just straightforward and amazing. And I mean, she's one of the only things that is going to keep this thing going, and she's not going to live forever. So I'm hoping someone can pick up her mantle, because she is a force of nature. She becomes sergeant. She's promoted to sergeant in 1987. And she's like, all right, first thing I want to do, Freeway Phantom case. Let's go. She is now in charge of 8 other homicide detectives, all men. She asks for all of the information, all of the case files. She gets boxes and boxes delivered to her desk. She goes through it and finds that all of the physical evidence has been destroyed.
Okay, these stories just drive me up the fucking wall. How did that happen?
Well, here's her explanation. She said no detective would have ever destroyed the information unless they were under the impression the case had been solved. And it had been so long by then that everyone she spoke to said, oh, I thought that case was solved. So the semen collected, the fibers, everything, the note, there's copies, thank God, but all of the things that could have yielded DNA evidence is gone.
Oh, my God.
But Romaine Jenkins will not be stopped. She goes to the FBI and says, help me. And they say, anything you want. And she said that They never said no to her, not once. And they led her to a giant fireproof, floodproof room that said, evidence preserved for historical records. Do not destroy. She found all of the FBI's records on the cases.
Well, thank God for that.
But no, forensic evidence. But again, she will not be daunted. So she pieces together what she can from the FBI. And then she goes back to the officers who were the first responders there at each victim site and says, can you help me? Most of which had retired by then. She said, can you help me? And they said, absolutely. Everyone gave her their notebooks, their personal files. She was able to make copies of everything and build the file back to the best of her ability. So now something has come from this, and that a law was passed that no rape or murder evidence can be destroyed in the DC area for 65 years.
Well, better late than never.
Now we're coming up on, almost 50 years. We're at 48 years. So, I don't know that this evidence, well, there's no evidence, but I don't know that any of the files will be, purged. I don't think they can be because it's still it's considered an open case, even if it's not active. But from now on, or from then on, no rape or murder could be, any information forensic could be destroyed for 65 years. That is something. And with the, advancement of technology as far as, you could take one hair and find someone. If there was just one thing left, they may have been able to find someone. But they have no idea if 48 years later, someone who may have been in his late 20s or early 30s at the time, if he's even still alive. But I bet you there's somebody who was alive or was told something or knows something. That is what I'm banking on. And Bertha Crockett, Brenda Faye Crockett's sister, the third victim, has what I think is the best outlook. She said that the most important time after a homicide is the first 48 hours, and we're now coming up on 48 years. But she still thinks someone knows something. Someone out there has information. They may not know they know something. But if you know something, call us, email us, call the DC police, and more cowbell.
If you'd like to support the podcast, please go to patreon.com/justthetipsters.